Hey, I'm Brian Stelter, and welcome to World News Day 2020. World News Day is a day that we set aside to celebrate some of the heroes from the global journalism community. Journalists who work diligently to provide all of us with the reliable and credible news that helps all of us navigate the changing and increasingly volatile world that we share. And this has been a year like nothing we have experienced. On the 4th of January 2020, the World Health Organization reported on its social media feed that there was a cluster of cases of pneumonia with no deaths in the city of Wuhan, China. Since that day, our world has changed in ways that we never could have anticipated. Economies have collapsed. Entire industries have been vacated. People we loved and admired have been taken from us too soon. As uncertainty kicked open the door in each of our lives, the search for facts has become more urgent than ever. And in this era of misinformation, it's become more difficult than ever. Lives continue to be in the balance. Our very way of life continues to hang in the balance. While COVID-19 caused us to recognize the fragility of our world and our place in it, movements have been born. Voices have been raised this year. Change has been ignited this year. 2020 has seen some of our city centers become places of mass protest, grief, and at times divisiveness. This very real theater that has played out nightly showed us the best of what democracy allows and, conversely, shone a light on the need for reform. Now, at a time when each of us have had our lives and our livelihoods impacted, I think we have more questions than ever. When it feels like answers have been in short supply, we have relied on journalists to chase the truth. We've relied on journalists to convey this truth through and try to cut through the daily flurry of misinformation that surrounds us more than ever. Journalists have sought the truth so that we may know it, so that all of us may know it. And in this year like no other, our society has learned to celebrate the essential service workers on the front lines of this global medical crisis. Tonight, we lend our voices to do the same. Tonight, we celebrate those on the front lines of journalism. We celebrate the men and women who, undaunted by circumstance, provide a service that is more critical than in any time in our history. In the age of a pandemic, these women and men literally risk their lives to get the story and get the truth. So tonight, in addition to hearing from many journalists, we will also be joined by some newsmakers, those who possess the courage to tell their story. It is our privilege to have them with us tonight. While we wish we could celebrate in person, we are grateful for the opportunity to gather in this new way, and we thank you for joining us. We also want to remind you that your donations provide critical support to the work of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. Among our first speakers is a person who has worked at the Daily Telegraph, the National Post, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and the Toronto Star, to name a few. He has made it his life's work to create environments for credible news to be found, amplified, debated, and discussed. He is proud to be a journalist. Please welcome the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail and the immediate past chair of the Canadian Journalism Foundation, David Walmsley. Joining David is a person who is not only a key engine in the creation of events like today, but has spent the better part of the past decade trumpeting the critical messages of media literacy, the importance of a free press, and credible news to industry and future industry every day and every week of the year. She is the president and executive director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation, Natalie Turvey.
Hello, everyone. We are thrilled to welcome all of you tuning in to our annual celebration of the power of journalism. Let me begin by extending our heartfelt thanks to CNN's Brian Stelter. We're honored to have him as our host again for World News Day. As he writes in the opening of Hoax, his best-selling new book, Brian is an advocate for factual journalism and a new dad who thinks about what kind of world his children are going to inherit. It's this ethos that brings him here today. It's this ethos that brings all of us here today. Journalism underpins every free society. It is a pillar of every democracy. For more than 30 years, the Canadian Journalism Foundation has been a force for excellence in journalism. Through programs that guide the public on how to sort fact from fiction in the age of misinformation, monthly talks that shine a light on the essential role journalism plays in our society, and through awards and fellowships that honor the best in the business and support next-generation journalists. The Foundation is an advocate and a voice for truth. I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to the World Newsday speakers joining us on our virtual stage. They are some of the world's top journalists and newsmakers. They are agents of change. To the remarkable musical guests who are lending their words and voices to our message today, thank you. World Newsday is only possible because of the generosity of our sponsors. Our gratitude to our steadfast supporter, the Google News Initiative, and thanks to our in-kind sponsor, Cision. Thank you for helping our message be heard.
Today, we are thrilled to be joined by the audiences of some of the world's most prominent and prestigious news organizations. But this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is happening on this World Newsday 2020. Newsrooms on 6 continents are honoring World Newsday in their own unique way. More than 100 news organizations are sharing stories that make a difference, stories that need to be told. Journalism has the power to build trust and to inform the public's understanding. During COVID, accuracy can literally save lives. World Newsday is about you, our audience, and today is about recognizing that relationship, where sharing information and providing critical news has never been more important. Newsrooms from around the world have chosen to hold World Newsday today to coincide with the International Day for Universal Access to Information. These two causes are linked as never before. On most days, these newsrooms travel their own paths, focused on their distinct audiences. But in this time of social justice, as well as social distance, we stand as an industry united in our message. Today, the world acts as one.
It is still a little too early to know all of the ways that 2020 will ultimately be remembered. But we know it will be remembered as a critical flashpoint in the history of U.S. civil rights. The shocking death of George Floyd caused citizens in major cities all around the world to take their voices to the streets to express their grief and outrage. On night 3 of the protests in Minneapolis, my colleague Omar Jimenez was on the front line, reporting live for CNN, when he and his production team were surrounded by Minnesota State Police in riot gear. Moments later, he was handcuffed and arrested live on the air on CNN, without explanation, while the world watched. To shed light on his experience, Omar is joined now by a veteran journalist who has traveled her country and the world in search of stories. She was also in Minneapolis to provide real-time updates on these historic protests. She is the multi-award-winning senior correspondent for CBC News. Please welcome Susan Ormiston.
So it's late May, you're in Minneapolis, it's early morning. Set the scene on that day.
Well, that day we were there on that scene in the early morning, basically covering our morning shift for CNN, as we had been for days leading up to that point, trying to set the scene for what a new day was going to look like when the attention of the world really was on that city of Minneapolis at the time, as police were clashing with protesters and as people were trying to get their story heard in a way that actually was meaningful.
Okay, but the street was burning behind you. There had been riots all night. I think this was the 3rd night of riots, and you've got a line of riot police standing behind you. And just so we catch the audience up to speed, let's roll a little bit of what happened next.
And this is a scene here playing out in Minneapolis. This is part of the advanced police presence that we saw come over the course of really minutes when the local police showed up at the fire department, or with the fire department, I should say, on that building we showed you that was burning. This is among the State Patrol unit that was advancing up the street, saying and scattering the protesters at that point for people to clear the area. And so we walked away. I'm sorry?
You're under arrest.
Okay. Do you mind
whoa,
telling
whoa,
me
whoa.
why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Under arrest, Omar, why were they taking you away? You were saying you would move to a place where they wanted you. Clearly, they were trying to clean the area and clear it, but why?
In that moment, and even still to this day, we have no idea why I was arrested in that moment. You're right. They were trying to clear that area, and we actually watched them clear the area from a distance that was out of their way. And we had actually done part of a previous report standing in front of that police line with them in the background, getting as close as we thought possible to the scene without actually being in it. But it turns out that changed. And a few minutes later, as you saw in that video, our crew ended our report being led away in handcuffs.
So what this example represented for all of us is further confirmation that as journalists, we're not a special status anymore. Particularly in urban conflicts, the fact that we are identified as press doesn't give us special status. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a reminder where it's always sort of been in the back of our minds, depending on what types of situations you go into. Now, it's different when you're walking into a White House press briefing or something where your credentials mean so much more and you have to show those credentials. But in these scenarios where at the end of the day, it comes down to you and the scene happening around you, the same can be said for natural disasters when you're covering hurricanes, fires, wildfires in California or elsewhere, or protests like these. Press credentials and showing that badge really means nothing, because you, in that moment, whether you like it or not as a member of the press, are now just part of whatever volatile situation is actually happening. You don't always see that play out and exemplified at the hands of police, but of course, we saw that play out here, since police would usually be the people that you would show your credentials to sort of get out of the situation or show why you should be here. But it was those same people that ended up going past that credential and, again, leading our crew away in cuffs just for doing our jobs.
Yeah, a couple of nights later, I was in Minneapolis as well. And, when the riot police were trying to clear the protesters again, they shot on our crew. I got hit in the shoulder and in the backside with a tear gas canister and a rubber bullet. But it's not unique. I've been in situations before where we have been a target as they're trying to clear the area. Why is it important to you that we are allowed some freedom to report unobstructed?
Well, for starters, it's in the United States Constitution, but of course, the freedom of the press, they are the eyes and the ears of the people. When you look at the protests and what happened in Minneapolis, the world would not have seen the demonstrations that happened there and the ferocity of the demonstrations if it were not for members of the press being able to tell that story, either visually or writing about it. If it were not for the members of the press being able to interview people about what the real pain and message was behind some of the more violent protesting that we saw in some cases descend into the nighttime. So getting the story out there helps everybody. Because if you have done nothing wrong, or you felt like you've done nothing wrong, whether you're a member of the police or otherwise, you also get to tell your side of the story. So being able to have us there on the scene covering is important for absolutely everyone. And when you don't discriminate who's reporting as a member of the press professionally versus who is just there as a protester, you damage some of that. And particularly when it's a story about relationship between members of the community and police, it doesn't do anyone on the police side any favors.
Omar, we work in a country where the president regularly calls the press the enemy. Is it surprising then that the police have adopted a view that we are part of the combatants?
Well, it's something we have to think about increasingly so every day, because when you have that type of messaging coming from the very top, I think you almost, in some cases, if you feel wronged as a reporter, you tell someone, and then depending on the seriousness of it, it escalates and escalates and escalates. But eventually the buck stops with who's leading. And if the person who's in ultimate leadership of this country is calling the press the enemy of the people, all of a sudden the complaints, the risks that we feel we are taking when going to do our job we don't quite know or feel that we're going to have the same protection and backing from the US government. And that's just speaking on American soil, but even more so when you go to other countries to tell some of those stories that are affecting Americans. Will the government have our backs? And it's a question that we're increasingly asking every day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story.
Of course.
All right.
Our first performer of the night was raised in a bilingual home in Montreal, the daughter of Burundian parents. The music she creates celebrates the diverse cultural influences that have surrounded her all her life. A Juno nominee, her effusive melodies and introspective lyrics led her to be named the winner of the 2019 Allen Slate Juno Masterclass. She is an artist to watch with a message we need to hear. Please welcome Aza.
Salut tout le monde, it's your girl Aza. J'espère que vous allez bien. This is Christopher Carniello on the guitar, and we're super excited to be playing for you today. This song is called Criminal. Hey. Don't look at me like a criminal. I'm just a chick trying to find my way. I know the time's so critical. I'm gonna save the world another day, 'cause I got a lot to learn, lots of places to see, and this is what I deserve. I wanna live for me. Don't look at me like a criminal. I'm only trying to find my way, because she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Yo, she step when she want. Yo, she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Oh, hey. Don't look at me like a criminal. You're not alone, we all got bills to pay, and other times are critical, yeah. I'm gonna save the world another day, 'cause I got myself to love, plenty of people to meet. So if I crash and burn, at least I live for me. Don't look at me like a criminal, yeah. I wouldn't have it any other way, because she make what she want and she do what she want. Hey. She make what she want and she do what she want. Because she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Yo, she step when she want. Yo, she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Walking with a smile, I'll be fine. Keep my head up through the pain and the rain. Yeah, I'll stand up. Hey, that's right. Walking with a smile, I'll be fine. And even through the rain, I'm gonna feel the sunshine. Don't look at me like I'm a criminal. Hey. Hey, don't look at me like I'm a criminal. That's right. It's pretty simple. Just live and let live. Hey. Chacun sa route, chacun son chemin, chacun son rêve, chacun son destin. Dis-toi que chacun sa route, chacun son chemin. Passe le message à ton voisin. Hey. Chacun sa route, chacun son chemin, chacun son rêve, chacun son destin. Dis-toi que chacun sa route, chacun son chemin. Passe le message à ton voisin. Because she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Yo, she step when she want. Yo, she make what she want, take what she want, get what she want. Yo, she step where she want. I see you really trying to mess with my mind, but I'll be the one and baby time after time. I mean like I'm a criminal. Don't look at me like I'm a criminal. No. Don't look at me like I'm a criminal. 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 No. Thank you so much. If you love what you hear, give me a follow at AIZABBY.
Suivez-moi au AIZABBY. Happy World News Day.
Thank you, Asa, and happy World News Day to you as well. In the, what's the right word? What's the best word? In the extraordinary times that we live in, there are moments when the very fabric of our democracy feels threatened. Americans have taken to the streets in frequency and greater numbers than at any time in this generation. The relationship between peaceful protesters and law enforcement continues to be unpredictable and volatile. In the national movement that was manifest in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing, some citizens who added their peaceful voice to the movement paid a steep price. There have been moments where weapons of suppression have been turned on protesters, with tragic results. In lending their voice, some citizens have sacrificed their vision. How does lending a voice to a movement turn into the story of a person being blinded in one eye? And what if the official story of how the injuries occurred is a different story than one the actual facts present? Well, to guide us through this story, a veteran of the Daily Telegraph and The Guardian, who joined the investigative team at the Washington Post in 2019. He's up next. Please welcome reporter John Swain and a protester whose life changed forever on May 30th, Mr. John Sanders.
When the protests over George Floyd's death broke out in cities across the country, I was struck by these powerful images breaking out on social media of protesters who had lost an eye, had traumatic eye injuries that had been caused by what police call less lethal munitions. That's rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, canisters. And I covered protests in Ferguson and Baltimore back in 2014, 2015, and this seemed new. This was something that we didn't really see during those protests following the death of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. So we really wanted to look at this and look at why people had been shot with these munitions. We found that 8 people had been partially blinded in just one day of protests, May 30th. And we spoke with them all about their experiences, and you can see a clip of that now.
So I squeezed my eye shut and started yelling, I'm pressed, I'm pressed.
I never thought I was going to go to a protest and lose an eye.
Whatever did just happen is catastrophic.
When it hit me, I just noticed the blood just coming out.
Something like a fire had exploded in my face.
And they turned around that corner, and then all of a sudden I was struck in the eye.
It was like I was burning up, I'm being burnt alive.
The pain, my eye was like the size of a softball at that time.
John, thanks for sparing the time to talk. I wondered if, first of all, you could say a bit about why you were there in Cleveland that day protesting. What drove you to show up?
So I decided to go that day because for a while I wanted to go to one of the larger protests. I've gone to like smaller events and I guess, social get-togethers where, we discuss a lot of, the events that are going on within the world, but nothing on that scale that I've been to. And with it being in Cleveland, being about an hour away from me, I felt like that was a perfect opportunity to, go out there. And decided to go out there to, be a part of the march and, so basically show that, I'm there supporting the cause and supporting everyone else that, took time out of their days to, go there and basically to show that there's something wrong and that we all collectively know that there's something wrong and we're going to use our First Amendment right to voice our opinions. And the other reason for me going is one of my hobbies is photography. So I take a lot of pictures of, things that, I just experienced from like world events going on. And then also I take a lot of pictures of nature. And that was, another opportunity for me to get some things under my belt and, kind of just document what was going on throughout the day, especially for people who weren't able to take time out their day and see and experience that. It's just something that down the road, if they ever want to know what happened in Cleveland, Ohio on May 30th, that, they have the opportunity to see.
How would you summarize to someone unfamiliar with your case what happened to you and what you were doing when it happened?
So the best way I could describe it is the reason I was there, which was protesting police brutality, happened to me from a police officer. At the time when I was shot, I was taking pictures, doing the documentation. We were actually, me and my group were getting ready to leave. Where I was shot was basically right across the street from the parking lot where we parked at. So I was 30 seconds from the vehicle, basically being able to head back home when I was shot. And at the time, I was just taking pictures of the Justice Center, of the glass and the graffiti that was on the wall of the Justice Center. And as I was leaving from where I was at taking pictures, I walked into the street. Within a few seconds of me walking into the street, I was struck by a beanbag round from a sheriff's deputy.
Now, we covered your case at the Washington Post. Other media have as well. What do you think is important about media coverage of these incidents?
Well, to be quite honest with you, for a long, long time before everyone had a camera in their pocket and, mass surveillance was everywhere, things like this have literally been happening since the foundation of this country since 1776 and before, when we were still, basically a British colony. People of color, but Black people in general, have been basically dehumanized. And for a long time, people like me have been saying, hey, this is what's happening to us. Please help us. And for a long time, people pretty much acted as if, we were making the stuff up, or, it's not really happening to the numbers or to the effect that we say it's happening. And it really hasn't been until, media and basically just everyday humans, everyday Americans have been taking videos of what we've been saying for generations. And I think that's huge, because I feel like a lot of people now understand that, this does happen, and it happens often. It happens much, much more often than what you can even think that it should happen. And I think that's very important.
John, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Time's up. Me too. These movements have assisted in shining a light on sexual discrimination, gender inequality, and workplace inequality. These are movements that remind us that discrimination and harassment of any kind is unacceptable and no longer tolerated. Now, while these movements emerged from the entertainment industry, other societies have remained guarded. Worlds with secrets. But courageous voices coming forward can often lead to other people in other worlds finding their voices too. Let me show you an example. When we cheer for our national athletes, when the opportunity presents, everybody participates, but there are often secrets buried deep. There's been an institutional culture in the sports world where behind those cheers, athletes would quietly endure punitive environments of harassment, abuse, and threat of penalty. The New York Times is building a forum to create dialogue about these critical issues. It's created an opinion-based, Emmy Award-nominated video series titled Equal Play. It's a safe environment where some of our elite female athletes have been able to articulate the challenges and discriminations that they have faced over their careers. By having the courage to come forward and tell their stories, these issues are not hidden anymore. Change is happening. So, he is the director and executive producer of Opinion Video for the New York Times, and joining him is an athlete once known as the fastest girl in America, who, since bravely telling her story, is no longer running away from anything. Please welcome Adam B. Ellick and Mary Kane.
So Mary, thanks for joining us. I guess my first question for you is if you can sort of talk us through your decision-making process on going public with a story that I know previously you kept very private, and that you mentioned, had some feelings of shame and self-blame attached to these feelings. So what sort of inspired you to share your story with the world through Times Opinion video?
Yeah, so for me, it had really only been about 5 weeks before the story was ultimately published that I, for lack of a better word, maybe came to terms with everything, in that my old coach in like late September or early October of 2019 was banned by USA Anti-Doping. And while reading through the like 200-page report of why he was banned, there were so many different moments of seeing like pure examples of times that I was lied to. And I think seeing that on paper kind of like shattered whatever rose-colored glasses or self-blame that I had continued to hold on to. And feeling that just amount of frustration and confusion and kind of working through that, I started to write personally, and I shared it with my family and a few friends, and we just felt that it was something that for my own healing process, I couldn't stand the idea of other people going through the same experience that I did. So a friend of mine connected me with Lindsay because, of course, I knew the work that she had done with Allison and everybody with Dream Maternity and the impact that that could have. And I thought, you know, if I could make an impact on at least one person's life, it was worth it.
So Lindsay Krause is the lead reporter and producer on my team who worked with you very closely on this. And previously, as you alluded to, she produced a series along with our whole team on maternity leave for sponsored female athletes at Nike. And as a result of that series, there were a bunch of policy changes. There was a congressional inquiry, and Nike announced new maternity policy for all sponsored athletes just after our story, the two stories were published. I guess I'm curious to hear from you about like why you chose to reach out to Lindsay. I mean, Lindsay is a marathoner. She's a woman. She's a wonderful reporter and editor. And I'm wondering like how much of a factor was sort of her biography and you feeling comfortable and working so closely with her on framing such a vulnerable story?
Yeah, I think it was incredibly important for me because I think there's two different sides of what goes into coming out with a story like this. And one, I'm coming out against a large corporation that has a lot more power than I do. And I knew working with an organization such as the New York Times, they would do the due diligence, whether it was background checking, going through the different paperwork, and making sure that I was protected just through the fact that they were going through second sources and almost corroborating any of my own claims, which I know to be true. But if you go to maybe a smaller organization, you're not going to have that extra strength behind you. And I think just on the second end of it, I saw how the Dream Maternity situation was handled. And I knew that it was handled with grace and with class and with power. And I just realized that that was what I wanted to be a part of. And clearly Lindsay had done an amazing job with that. And so trusting someone like her with my story was hard because I'd never really gone and done that before with anybody in the full context that I did with her. But there's something about Lindsay where I felt safe. And I think part of it was her own history as a reporter and also just our connection as, you know, two fellow runners.
So one of the delightfully surprising things for me in sort of commissioning and co-producing this series was sort of there was like a Me Too like ripple effect in terms of the Dream Maternity stories sort of, you know, helped us connect to you. And as a result of your story, there was a follow-up about the lack of representation of female coaches in college sports. So we sort of, there was like success kept breeding success. And I'm wondering if you can talk briefly about what was the result of this op-ed besides the fact that female, employees at Nike protested and had a walkout on their campus after your video published. I'm curious both like who reached out to you and what was the impact of this story specifically for you and for Nike?
Yeah, so I think really the biggest thing was just the reach that it had. I hadn't expected. I thought this would stay mostly within the running world and for it not to become really a video that was viewed, I think, like 15 million times. And so just that sheer amount of awareness that was gained was incredibly important, because I think one thing that's, often not discussed is the fact that women's health as a whole is often not researched in the same capacity as men's or general health is. And so topics that I discussed, such as REDS, or relative energy deficiency in sports, suddenly had this huge influx of people asking questions and realizing, wow, this is something I had never heard of. And I'm realizing that I'm a young female athlete, or I'm a young male athlete, and I might have these warning signs. And so I think from just like a medical perspective, it was incredible being able to have that level of impact and maybe raise awareness of something like that. And then from the emotional side of things, there have been so many other athletes who have since come forward, and the conversation of what it means to be a coach and what a coach's role is has really started in profound ways. I mean, we've seen Lori Hernandez on the gymnastics team come forward, and there's a safe sport case against her coach. And really the whole conversation of what's appropriate in coaching has just exploded in a way that I think had never really been discussed before. And so it was really humbling to see that amount of just reaction, and for people to react to my story in such a positive way. I think when it comes to Nike directly, there have been some employees who, of course, walked out, and there was a lot of frustration, I think, internally. But when it comes to like a direct response, like maybe the Dream Maternity case, I didn't really have that. Instead, they're continuing to defend Alberto and stand by his USADA case and safe sport case to try to get those turned around. But I think there's, in a general sense of the whole athletic community, a positive conversation that's starting. But I think there are still some forces that haven't fully started to kind of open up and think about what it means to be a good coach and what it means to be a healthy athlete.
So before I ask you another question, let's first take a look at a quick excerpt or highlight from the video op-ed that you published with Times Opinion last year.
When I first arrived, an all-male Nike staff became convinced that in order for me to get better, I had to become thinner and thinner and thinner. This Nike team was the top running program in the country. And yet we had no certified sports psychologist, there was no certified nutritionist. It was really just a bunch of people who were Alberto's friends. So when I went to anybody for help, they would always just tell me the same thing, and that was to listen to Alberto.
Well, when Lindsay first pitched me the story, we certainly internally didn't view it as a running story or even a sports story, but I think it transcended that beat. And for me, it was a mental health story, it was a physical abuse story, it was a gender story, and it was a science and health story, and also a sports story. So it doesn't surprise me that it reached such a broad audience, because I think it touched people in different ways. I mean, one of the commandments of the opinion video department at the Times is that investigative and enterprising journalism doesn't need to feel like homework. And you trusted us a lot in the process to try to make it creative and engaging, and also full of rigorous, airtight reporting. And I think that combination enabled us to make something special. Before we wrap up, I'm just curious what you're up to and how this video has changed your life and your running career, and what are you working on now?
Yeah, I think it's been incredible just to kind of reflect and realize that it's been nearly a year since the story came out. And I think just from a very personal side, it's helped me heal a lot. I think because I was finally able to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the fault in everything. I wasn't my own self-destructive force, and that there was more at play and things that were being kind of keeping me in the dark, I guess, has really helped me almost move on and start to find more, I think, joys and passions, especially just within the sport of running and beyond. But outside of that, I've also found this new passion of promoting what it means to be a healthy athlete, what it means to be a woman in sport, And I think there's something incredibly powerful about finding something that I love so much, and it's standing up for other people. And running has been fun. It's been just like, I guess, a new birth within my running, because I realized what's really important in life, and that's your health, that's your happiness, it's your family, that's your friends. And I think it's actually renewed my sense of what it means to be a runner, and makes me want to train even harder than before.
Great. Well, thank you for trusting us to share your story and your courage and how brave you were in sharing it is something that's been acknowledged wide and far by the audience. So thank you for that.
Who speaks for those who can't speak for themselves? In this time of global financial uncertainty, those who live on the fringes of society are at greater risk than ever before. Now, complicate these financial challenges with a global pandemic, and we have a growing group of people who are falling through society's cracks. Husbands, mothers, brothers who face an unknown tomorrow. Sisters, sons, and daughters whose stories may never be heard. Zara Mojtahedzadeh is the work and wealth reporter for the Toronto Star. She reports on income and wealth inequality, the changing workplace, precarious work, labor issues, and workmen's compensation. Zara's work has been recognized by the Hillman Foundation Prize for Social Justice-Oriented Investigative Journalism. She tells the stories of those who are at risk, stories of the marginalized, stories we need to know. One such story is the shocking narrative of a COVID-19 outbreak at a migrant worker facility in Ontario and the human and legal aftermath that ensued. Joining Zara is a brave journalist who has been the subject of threats since the publishing of news that was critical of his country's government. He is the general editor-director of the Mexican newspaper Reforma. Please welcome Juan Pardanis.
Thank you so much for having me, and Juan, thank you for being here. Last year, I spent a large part of the year investigating Canada's migrant worker program, spending time in Mexico with families who participated in the program, and spending time with workers here in Canada on the farms that they come to every year, spending time in bunkhouses. And that was really the first place that I thought about back in February, March, when the pandemic hit. And my work since then has really focused on how these longstanding issues around unsafe living and working conditions have coalesced to really devastate the migrant worker community here in Canada, and over 1,000 workers testing positive for coronavirus. And I think Canadians are more and more starting to understand the role that these workers play in our economy. But I think what's harder for Canadians to understand is what are the dynamics that bring workers here to begin with. And so, Juan, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what the forces driving migration out of Mexico look like.
I think these forces have evolved over the years. Now, I would say that forces like violence, insecurity, and insecurity is not just organized crime, it's that you're not basically sure where your daily income will come from in the future. That those forces have also come intertwined in the decision of Mexican people to try to sign up for this program.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what your choices are? If you are a young person in rural Mexico, maybe with little opportunity for formal education, what are your choices in terms of earning a living, and what is attracting workers or driving them to participate in a program that, obviously separates them from their family for much of the year, for most of their lives?
It's not just formal education. One big problem also is the informal economy, or the chances you have to get a regular job with social security, with medical coverage, a job that it's basically regulated by the law. if we see statistics, that's a very small chance. Around 60% of the Mexican people work in the informal economy. If you see it from a demographical point of view, it's a huge chunk of the economy. Sadly, it's a huge chunk of the economy that does not produce enough wealth for these people.
And I'm curious your thoughts on what are the biggest challenges in Mexico to achieving that end of that freedom from want?
Well, it's a tough question. Now I would say first the economy does not produce enough wealth to give a dignified income to these people. Then we had a lot of trouble, and the new government is not helping with economic decisions. Now, in the middle of the pandemic, is the country that has spent less in economic recovery. They think it's kind of these typical Keynesian policies that are working all around the world, and it's like the basic response of a government in a crisis. It's perceived here as neoliberal, no, to help the economy. So now I would say all the hardship that these people have lived through decades, it's just going to become worse and more difficult, and the drive to migrate will be even bigger, because you have economic problems, you have a weak state controlling organized crime. With a weak state, violence become kind of a default way to solve conflicts between neighbors, between owners of land in rural areas. So as long as we have like a weak state, the possibilities to maximize your potential as an individual, to guarantee basic income for your family, are not going to be here. So I wouldn't be surprised if now more people dream of the possibility to get a job somewhere else. Just try to walk in the shoes of someone that is willing to die to get a decent job. And that's more for the people that are crossing the desert near Arizona or Sonora, which is the living experience of someone that it's risking their own life just to get an 8-hour shift in a restaurant, or harvesting a field in California. It's hard for someone like me that has a regular job and basically a lot of things solved in my daily life, just to imagine why I would put my life in risk just to get a very decent basic job opportunity. No?
Yeah. How do you see your reporting as affecting change and tackling those huge challenges that you've just laid out?
Well, we have been very critical when Donald Trump said that we Mexicans will pay for the wall to prevent migration. I would say that sadly he had a point, because now the way the Mexican police force, the federal police force, is behaving with migration from Central America, which has a different dynamic, but it's another source of human tragedy. Actually, Donald Trump was right. We are using our taxes not to build a physical wall, but to use the power of the government, the power of the police force to prevent migration. So our reporting has been focusing a lot on how a government that says that they come from the left credentials are becoming the unofficial migration police force of the Trump government. No?
Thank you so much, Juan, for joining us on World News Day. We really appreciate the insight and perspective that you bring to these issues.
Tonight, as we continue to shine a light on those who go towards the fire, brave reporters like Sarah and Juan, we would like to give a nod to the photojournalists, the courageous people that have gathered the visceral images that history will use to define and explain our world of 2020. These are images that deliver emotions that words sometimes cannot. So the images that will accompany our next performance are provided to us by our friends at the Canadian Press and Associated Press. Thank you for your generosity, and thank you for the work you do. Providing the soundtrack for these images is William Prince, an artist who joined us on our stage last year and who we are delighted to have back. He is a Juno and SOCAN award-winning singer and songwriter whose voice has taken him around the world. He has opened for Neil Young and been featured in Rolling Stone, and now he's joining us from his home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Please welcome William Prince.
Hello, World News Day. I'm William Prince, greeting you from Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Happy to be invited here to celebrate journalism, and more importantly, truth in journalism. Today I offer my song 7 in solidarity with those fighting the fight within the Black Lives Matter movement. May your love be pure like an eagle, wisdom be under every stone you turn. Let truth be key to freedom and bind you to the path that holds the light. We're the reason that there's 7 sins and teachings. Each one can wait the other out. Life is 2 wolves, good and evil, who you feeding? Tell me, are you in or are you out? Oh, be honest and honor each other. Don't make a promise that you'll have to break. Have forgiveness when there's only hatred. Stand up for good, for goodness sake. May your mind be vast like the ocean. Salvage the lesson from each storm you survive, and let honesty lead you across the sea. Forever keep you on the current that carries the light. 'Cause in this world that's growing older faster, humility will keep your spirit young. When you're looking far into the future, don't forget how far you've already come. Ooh-hoo-hoo. 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 May your strength be abundant, everlasting. Joy bring peace to your life. Surrender your heart to the 7. Keep to the path that holds the light. Let respect be the law by which you're driven. 'Cause respect, it gets earned, it ain't given. To our brothers and sisters, born with 2 spirits, may you find the courage to reconcile. 'Cause in this world that's growing older faster, humility will keep your spirit young. When you're looking far into the future, don't forget how far you've already come. Ooh-hoo-hoo. 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 And may your love be pure like an eagle, wisdom be under every stone you turn. Let truth be a key to freedom and bind you to the path that holds, to the path that holds, to the path that holds the light.
How do we tell a story in a place where all messages are controlled by the state? How do you tell a story of oppression in an environment of oppression? How do you tell a story of a people who are afraid to speak? These were some of the challenges faced by the Globe and Mail's Beijing-based Asia correspondent Nathan Vanderklype and the BBC's Beijing correspondent John Sudworth, as they attempted to uncover the story of the treatment of the Uyghur minority, a group of largely Muslims from the Xinjiang region who have been detained by the Chinese government for the purposes of political indoctrination and quote-unquote skills training. Their recent reporting included the discovery of a video filmed on the smuggled cell phone of a vanished fashion model. Here's a look at that rare footage, along with Nathan Vanderklype of the Globe and Mail and John Sudworth from the BBC.
So Nathan, I don't know about you, but when I first saw that video, and it was passed to us by sources, we can't go into too much detail about that. But when I first saw it, I knew we were looking at something pretty extraordinary, given everything we know about what's happening in Xinjiang. What were your thoughts?
There were a few things. One was this video, it felt to me was it was particularly timely given the broader conversation about China and its response to coronavirus. That was my initial thought. But then beyond that, I think as we were reporting the story, what really stood out to me was how this video was a demonstration of the degree to which the broader project in Xinjiang, this move to sort of incarcerate people, to re-educate people, to politically indoctrinate people, we have been told that some of that project was over. And we've heard again more recently this idea that sort of people have all graduated from these re-education centers that have been out. But I think what the video showed is that, in fact, the elements of this remain much in place, and that people, even very successful people, Uyghurs, are being still taken from other parts of China and brought back to Xinjiang and subjected to very harsh treatment. From then, I think it was a question, before we did anything, of going to some lengths to try to sort out whether it was true. And I can talk about one element of this, and perhaps you can sort of speak about that as well, and particularly the implications of it, because of course there's a great deal of scrutiny on reporting around Xinjiang, not least from the government in China. One of the elements that I went frame by frame through the video looking for buildings, identifiable buildings that were in the video, and trying to match those up with the neighborhood where Merdan had told his family where he was located. And in fact, it was very clear that there were very obviously identifiable buildings, a trio of apartment buildings that were right next to a partially constructed shell of additional apartment buildings that were very unique and that were located right about where he said he was. So to me, it was important to get that. But perhaps you could talk about some of the other elements we went to and the importance of doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, it was very important to try to verify as much as we could. I think the thing that struck me, having spent time trying to report the story in Xinjiang, both on the ground through reporting trips to the region, but also as many media organizations are having to do increasingly nowadays through secondary sources, satellite photos, testimony from people who have been in the camp system. And of course, all of this vital because it is getting harder and harder, given China's control of the story, its monitoring and obstruction of people trying to report independently in Xinjiang.
it's important that we look to these sources. You're always you're always peering through or over this kind of wall of censorship. And I think for me, what was very strong, obviously, about the Murdan Gappa story that we worked on together was that here was a rare moment where you could actually look into the eyes, unfiltered, of somebody inside the system. Hear his story in his own words being sent from inside that system. And I think for me, that's what was truly extraordinary. And I think really part of the reason it had the resonance that it did.
Maybe just to wrap up, we could talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that do exist, because this story obviously didn't involve us traveling to Xinjiang. We were able to report this from Beijing, but you and I have both encountered some very serious obstacles to attempting to report in Xinjiang on some of our various trips there. I at one point had a laptop that was taken by the Ministry of State Security. I've been tailed. You've been tailed. I think I was tailed once by 4 vehicles. I don't remember what your record was, but I think it's quite a bit larger than that in terms of the numbers of people who have been behind you. But the effort that has taken place in Xinjiang to try to bar people from reporting this is extraordinary. I've been threatened with arrest. I've had photographs deleted. I've had sort of the following presence so close that, I was walking away from my car to buy breakfast and I had somebody walking 10, 15 paces behind me every turn I took, monitoring me. And there have even been sort of faked accidents that have been done to sort of close down roads, like construction sites that have been made to appear out of nowhere to prevent people from going to certain places. So yes, I think there has been, due in no small part to extraordinary efforts by many reporters here in China, some success in getting out elements of the story. But I think it's also worth pointing out the degree to which there have been obstacles to doing this.
Absolutely. And of course, they've only become greater as the international scrutiny of what's happening has intensified. So in some ways, it's getting harder to report. Of course, the virus in China this year has added another layer of complication to getting to Xinjiang. I mean, for me, every time I do this story, I think the thing I'm reminded of is, how much we should cherish, the methods and the values of a free press. People, I think that there's no doubt about it. The media, there's a sense of crisis in the media in other parts of the world. The role and function of the media is being called into question. I mean, our reporting is one small part of this extraordinary effort that has gone on. But, what's amazing is despite the best efforts of the Chinese government, the truth is out there. Those who've spent hours painstakingly going through China's own procurement documents for the building of some of these camps, the satellite photos, the analysis of them, the victim testimony, all compiled together, paints a compelling picture of the truth of that system. And that couldn't have been done without, as I say, the values of openness and transparency that a free press brings to a story. So for me, it's a reminder of just how important those things are.
With our collective attention being drawn by issues that we couldn't have even imagined a few short months ago, it's easy to understand if it feels like some of the societal issues that predate the global pandemic have fallen off the collective radar or become something less than top of mind. But these issues remain and demand our attention. Despite being knocked off the front page by COVID-19, there are urgent societal crises that linger, crises that did not disappear because of the virus, narratives that involve people who are still seeking their rightful place in our society, people who still seek justice and equality, or in some cases, people who just want clean drinking water in their communities. Joining us next are 2 women who continue to work to make sure that those outside the mainstream are not forgotten and are treated equally. Tanya Talega is a columnist with the Globe and Mail and the author of 7 Fallen Feathers, racism, death, and hard truths in a northern city, as well as all our relations, finding the path forward. And Autumn Pelche first addressed the United Nations at the age of 13. A few short years later, Autumn is an internationally recognized advocate for clean water, proud to be known as a water warrior. Please welcome Tanya Talega and Autumn Pelche.
Buzu, Ainin, Tanya Talega, Nagisnakanas. Hi, my name is Tanya Talega, and I am really happy to be here with you today, speaking to someone I admire so much, and that is the Chief Water Commissioner for the Anishinaabe Nation, Autumn Peltier.
That's nice to meet you too.
And thanks for joining us today. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your position. You have such an important role in our communities, and I wanted you to explain to everybody what your role is as the Chief Water Commissioner for the Anishinaabe Nation.
Okay, well, first of all, my name's Autumn Pelche. I'm 15 years old. I'm from Homakonga, Manitoulin Island, and I'm the Chief Water Commissioner for the Anishinaabe Nation. And really what my role is as the Chief Water Commissioner is I have a seat at the table where I'm able to have a say in when it comes to decision making for the Great Lakes and First Nations communities. And I was given that role when I was 14 years old last year after my Auntie Josephine and Norman passed away, and they found that it was like the best to hand and pass down the role to me because I was already carrying footsteps and doing my work. So the role that I have right now is a very important role to me.
It truly is, because not only does it come from your family and from your aunt, but also too, as females, as women, we are water carriers, and this is such an important role that you are playing for all of us. And it reminds me of how important we have to treat the earth, how important we have to treat each other. And along those lines, I always think of why is it that Canada can't seem to figure out what's happening with those boil water advisories, and why it is we still have so many of our communities without clean, drinkable water. Can you tell me how many communities are there, or about how many communities are there that don't have drinking water right now, and why is that?
Well, there's 61 drinking water advisories in Ontario right now, and there's over 100 in Canada alone. And I think really what the meaning behind that is, and why nothing's being done about it, is because, well, I think it has a lot to do with racism and environmental racism, and you see a lot of it, and you see the First Nations communities in Northern Ontario that are suffering. They're getting the very hard impacts of this issue, and I believe that's because they're remote communities, and the media and government doesn't pay enough attention to them because they're remote communities. But that doesn't mean that they're anything less than anybody else here. And for example, if it was somewhere like Toronto or Ottawa, in an area like that got a boil water advisory or couldn't drink their water, they would act as soon as possible on that. And why can't they do that in a First Nations community? That's what I still don't understand to this day.
What is the role of journalism in amplifying your message?
Well, journalism actually plays a really big part in the stuff I do, because that is the kind of like a big part of how I get my message out, and a lot of it goes on social media, or they go in articles, and I think that's where people are able to learn about the stuff I do. And I think that a lot more journalism needs to be based towards Indigenous youth and environmental activists, because like I said before, as a person of color or as an activist of color, I feel that we are put in the background because we are not heard enough because of the color of our skin. Because when you see stuff, you see it's the non-Indigenous people that are the most well known for this kind of stuff, and I feel that we need to be more heard. And it's because, like, I feel this way because my people and people of color have been doing this for so many years, but we're still put in the background. No matter how hard we fight or how long we fight, we're still put in the background. And I feel that with journalism, journalists they can help us get our message out, and that we could be heard.
I think that you're doing an incredible job, and you are a leader to all of us. And so to that I say, Gitchi Miigwech.
Not only is the world around us changing, the planet under us is more volatile than ever before. In this year, 2020, the world watched in horror as fires in Australia raged and over 1 billion animals were killed or displaced. In this year, 2020, floods displaced 12 million people in India. In this year, 2020, drought in Central America debilitated the region's agricultural lifeblood, leaving 3.5 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. In this year, 2020, the sky turned orange and pink in the western U.S. as California redwoods burned. How has our coverage of climate issues evolved amid all of this? Well, our next two guests are from National Geographic. She is the senior executive editor, and he is the senior environmental editor. Please welcome Indira Lakshmanan and Robert Kunzig.
Hey, Rob. So we have millions of readers not only in North America, but around the world in many languages. And they've been relying on us a lot for our coverage of this pandemic. But one of the things that we did that was so unique this year was our April Earth Day issue that was an anniversary of the 50 years since the first Earth Day. That was really your brainchild. Tell us about how the issue came about and what was so special.
Yeah, so this, as you say, it was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and we decided that it wasn't just another anniversary, that it really corresponded to a time when we're at kind of a fork in the road in terms of global environmental issues. And I think if you're paying attention to the news these days, I mean, the pandemic itself, but the fires, the hurricane, I think the awareness is sinking in that we're really at a crucial time. And so we didn't want to just look to the past. We really wanted to look forward. And so we asked the question, what will the Earth be like in 2070 on the 100th anniversary? And we presented the issue for the first time as a flip book. We basically outlined two distinct visions of the future, one good, one in which we save the world, and one in which you turn the issue upside down and we lose the planet, essentially. And the point of that was to give people a way of feeling not only the urgency of environmental problems, but also to give them a sense of agency, to give them a sense that they have a choice in the matter. And I think that's absolutely crucial on environmental issues in particular.
That's one of the key things we've seen in people's reaction to science journalism, is that the more that they feel that they're seeing not just problems, but also solutions and things that, we are showing them, again, in a fact-based way that they can do, the more they get involved, as you say, agency. So tell me a little bit about the cover story you wrote in March on the end of trash. That sounds very woo-woo. Like, is that even possible, the end of trash?
Yeah, I think utopia gets a bad rap. I really think you need utopian visions, and the circular economy certainly is one. It's the idea that we can redesign our economies basically to eliminate waste in all its forms. And I basically went out on a reporting tour to try to find places where this was starting to happen. And the point of it is, people need visions like that to steer towards. You need to give, as an environmental journalist, it's absolutely crucial, of course, to give people realistic sense of the problems they're facing. And so we write about the melting of Antarctica and Greenland, and I've written about the drying of the West and things like that. But you also need to give them a sense of purpose and of possibility. And that's what we've been trying to do lately. lately, especially this year, to look more towards the future and to present the sort of hopeful visions of the future.
Our attention has changed, of course, since April, when we were so focused on Earth Day and climate change, and it has really sort of refocused on the pandemic. We've published literally scores and scores of stories about the science behind COVID and its spread and the environmental impact and the health impacts, as well as dedicating, an issue to past pandemics and how those were solved. You're working on our November issue. Tell us how you saw the coronavirus play out in the way it's affecting not just health, but also the environment and the natural world.
Yeah, well, I think we've all been horribly shocked by this terrible year. The pandemic is continuing to cause, terrible suffering. And I think for the environment, the important thing is to just try to think about in what sense could this crisis be an opportunity. And it'll be an opportunity, it'll turn out to have been an opportunity if it causes us to stop and think in some fundamental way about the way we're doing things on this earth, about the way we're getting energy, about the way we're using forests and the seas and so on. And I believe that's really possible. I believe moments like this are times when people are open to considering sort of fundamental systemic change. I mean, I think you see that happening on race relations in this country. I think it could happen on the environment too. At least I'm hopeful it would be. And so for that November issue, I've written an essay that tries to make that point.
Well, I really appreciate it, Rob, and I really appreciate all the reporting that your team and the science team are doing to really ground everything we talk about in this conversation in facts and get away from opinions, but really base it in what the science is of COVID, of climate change, of environmental change, and what we can be doing about it. Thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
It has sometimes been said that being a journalist in the world of sports is like working in the candy store of life. Well, like so many stores, the candy store of sports was paused on the evening of March 11th. We all remember that moment when sports reporters found themselves with no sports to report. Play-by-play broadcasters had no plays to broadcast. Everything just froze. But undaunted, some have used their existing platforms to continue to engage and entertain. Olive and Mabel have become two of the internet's favorite dogs. They are the canine companions of Andrew Cotter, one of the UK's most respected commentators for his work on golf, tennis, rugby, and boating for the BBC. The quarantine play-by-play videos that Andrew has created with Olive and Mabel have generated more than 40 million views. So now, joining Andrew, another proud dog owner and a very accomplished journalist as well, one of the hosts of CTV's Your Morning, please welcome Anne-Marie Mediwake.
Hey, Andrew, great to meet you. I brought Zebby because I think he was hoping to meet either Mabel or Olive. Are they there with you?
Well, hang on a second. Can you just see an eyes and a slightly domed head there?
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, so Mabel's here. Olive's here as well, but it involves moving the laptop because she won't come to... Actually, she will come to me. Hang on a second. Of course she'll come to me. I forgot. I had bribery. So, Olive, you got to come... There we go. Here we are. This is the modern
there
world.
They are.
Tilting laptops down. Here we go. Why don't you come here? So just nosies. It's just nosies and a bit of Labrador eating on mic as well. So there we are. Right, that's all we're going to have just now.
Right, it's all part of the great color commentary. Andrew, your videos, as we said, have been enjoyed by tens of millions of people. Take us back to when COVID shuts down professional games. You have no color commentary to do. Where did the idea come from to start using your talents on your pets?
I think it was a little bit of boredom. As I said in the first tweet, I was bored, and it was sort of a slightly joking tweet. But not that I was bored, I was slightly concerned, to be honest, because all sport had disappeared. And I remember that it was the 13th of March, Friday the 13th, fittingly. And then on that date, the end of the Six Nations rugby disappeared. I think the London Marathon went that day. The US Masters Golf went, all events which I would have been doing. And then over the next couple of weeks, What do we have? The Olympics, Wimbledon, the boat race. So my whole diary emptied, and I was a little bit concerned, but I've got that slight broadcasters need to show off as well. And so I just thought, I don't know, I'll say, look, I was kind of saying, I'm at a loose end here. What's a sports commentator supposed to do? What can I commentate on? I could have commentated on anything mundane around my house, but it just so happens that, you know, most of my days are filled with my dogs. So I thought I'll commentate on them doing something. And so it's went. So really that was the start of it.
Well, your boredom turned into some great levity during lockdown. I want to give everybody just a chance to see some of what we're talking about. This is you doing color commentary on a dog's breakfast.
Well, how fitting that it should come down to these two. Olive in her familiar black, 5 times the champion. Mabel, the rising star, winner last year. You can see how excited they are, but also feel the tension.
Get on with it.
And here it's in the crowd as we near the start of this final. And now they go, Olive away first, but a problem with Mabel's ball. That might cost her now, having to play catch up. Both settling quickly into rhythm. You can see the contrast in styles. Mabel, heavy tail use, happy to be alive. Everything's amazing. Olive, more steady, wasting little energy. Very much of the old Labrador school. Eating's a serious business. Don't bollocks around wagging your tail.
So these videos, Andrew, as we said, have been enjoyed by tens of millions of people. Were you surprised at how much joy they brought people?
I was surprised at the reaction to it. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't think, I mean, I thought maybe my mother might appreciate it and she would only be doing it out of sympathy for me and my predicament. But I didn't think that it was going to have quite the reaction it did around the world as well. And it's interesting, you know, when a video goes viral, because obviously I hadn't, you know, been at the center of a viral video thing before, to see the way it moves and to see the way it went from the UK and then moved out around the world, and then to see people in the United States, and then quite a lot of people in Canada appreciating it as well. And I don't know if that was a Ryan Reynolds thing, because he'd got on board with the first one, and whether there was a strong connection there, I don't know. But it was just, the reaction, as you said, was just positive. Everyone was being nice about it and enjoying it, and that was something nice, because social media isn't always nice. So yeah, I was actually really touched by it.
Well, I think it's because, I mean, it was such a heavy time and there was so much heavy news. We were talking about numbers and you know, we're starting to keep tracks of deaths and those who were ill. And so it just brought a real life smile to people's faces. Also, I think a lot of people could relate, either if you were out of work or trying to find new ways to adapt to the work that you had. You certainly did that. You know, sports has really changed during this time of the pandemic. You know, you're either not playing, or we've seen sports come back in some way. Like in Canada, we had the NHL bubble, or the NBA right now is bubbling. How has COVID changed for sports broadcasters like yourself?
Oh, well, enormously. I mean, I'm a most sports broadcasters in the UK operate on a freelance basis, you know, self-employed, and they might work for various employers. I mean, most of my work is for the BBC, but I can work for anybody. It's just in 2020, I couldn't work for anybody at all. It's because all events went. So my diary was empty. And so now it's coming back slowly, but I did my first commentary you know, early in September, and it was my first commentary in 6 months on sport. And usually I would have been in Tokyo for the Olympics or Wimbledon, all these events. The summer would have been very busy, so it's very strange. And it's very strange to commentate with no fans, no spectators in the stadiums or at the events. And of course, you know, for example, at this track and field, this athletics, I was commentating, and then once your race is over and someone else is commentating, you put the mask back on. So these are adjustments that we're all having to make, but it's just very, very strange. But I think it's necessary that sport comes back where possible, because it gives people that escape. And you were talking about it with the dogs. People needed something to just lighten the seriousness of this year, and sport can do that as well as it hopefully keeps on coming back.
I want to talk to you about Olive and Mabel, if we can, because they have now become more famous, I think, than some of the athletes that you've covered in the past. So much so that they knocked you off the book cover.
Well, it's interesting because there are two. So the UK and the rest of the world edition, it got taken up by a few publishers around the world, and the UK edition has a picture of me and Olive and Mabel on a mountain, and for the North American edition, which is pretty much the same inside, but on the cover, they decided that they could do without me. So I've been cropped off and it's just Olive and Mabel, which is, listen, I totally agree with that decision, to be honest, because I quite like just being the unseen voice behind behind these two clowns who are alongside me just now and staring at me as I call them clowns. I'm sorry, but you are. So, I mean, look at this clownish face here. Look, this is a clown. A lovely clown, but that's what she is. Anyway, so yes, I'm not on the North American book cover, so but I'm sort of just out of frame. But it's all about these two, so I can't argue with it.
Well, we hope you continue to make your videos and your commentary with all of it. And Mabel, it's such a pleasure to talk to you on World News Day. Take care.
Okay, thank you. I've got to just end on them. There we are. So Olive and Mabel, here we are.
Bye, Olive.
Well, Olive, are you interested in anything at all? No, you just want to have a snooze. Okay, sorry. Let sleeping dogs lie. Right, thanks very much.
Well done. Bye-bye.
This past year is one where some of our tech giants have faced unprecedented scrutiny from an increasingly skeptical public. Is what I'm reading real? Can I trust it? Who is behind this? Should this forum for expression be regulated? These are just some of the questions we find ourselves asking with greater and greater regularity. At the same time, some of these tech companies are using their resources to preserve some of the local news sources that are so vital to the communities we all care about. These companies have so many roles in our lives now. You know, the same technologies that bring us unprecedented immediacy also bring us unprecedented access to the myths and disinformation in the world, to those whose intentions may not be so transparent. We have more access to real and reliable news, but also to the swamps of the internet. It is a complicated, complicated time. Our next guest has been involved in digital media since 1980. Now, in his role as Vice President of News at Google, he guides Google's strategy on how news surfaces on Google News, Google Search, and mobile devices. If I were to sit here and list every one of his accomplishments and achievements and the recognitions he's received, I would have very little time to actually speak to the man. But in short, he has spent his entire life as an advocate of and a promoter of truth. Recently, I had the privilege of speaking with Richard Gingras. Hey, Richard, happy World News Day. We were together physically in Toronto this time last year, so I thought I would ask you first, what's changed? How has Google's relationship with the news industry evolved in the past year or so?
Well, I think several things. I mean, first of all, I think, as we all know, the role of digital in all of our lives has continued to progress without question. That, in some regards, has been a boon to the news industry in serving the needs of their communities. It's also been, of course, a challenge. The pandemic, of course, with COVID has been a particular challenge as businesses and communities weren't operating, weren't advertising with local news publishers. So we did feel it was important at our end to continue and expand our work in working with local news publishers to find new models, to find new solutions. But with COVID specifically, we felt it was important to step up and help financially. We did launch a journalism emergency relief fund globally, targeted specifically at local news entities. We contributed $40 million into that ecosystem, providing grants to 6,000 news organizations around the globe, which they've used to maintain staff during these very important times. Yeah. It won't end there. We'll continue with those efforts, continue to collaborate as closely as we can to make sure that we have an ecosystem going forward for journalism that is healthy and is sustainable.
Some publishers like News Corporation are challenging Google. There's this effort in Australia to change the business relationship completely. What is Google's view of that?
Well, we think, first of all, that it's important to understand indeed what has happened and understand Google's role in it. We today contribute a vast amount of value to the news industry simply in terms of traffic. Right? As an example, we sent last month 24 billion visits to news sites from Google Search and our other properties. Each one of those visits is an opportunity for the publisher to build a relationship and drive advertising revenue, which we do. That's resulted in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for news publishers. But we will continue to, as I said, collaborate, work to see what more we can do. We understand that publishers would like to see more assistance from companies like Google. In some cases, that might be appropriate. But in other cases, I mean, basically, we want to make sure that to the extent that countries around the world look at regulating the internet, that we make sure that in the efforts of publishers, particularly legacy publishers, to try to protect their past interest in revenue streams, that we don't lose the tremendous value of the internet in enabling new voices, right? All of us today have access to many more voices than we had in the past. Those who are coming to the business in news today with digital properties and are doing great jobs. And we want to make sure that they don't get lost in this effort as well, that we enable and maintain the diversity that the internet has allowed us to have, from large publishers, small publishers, new publishers, old publishers. And we'll continue to work at that.
And finally, my show is reliable sources, but there's so many unreliable sources. So much has been made of the infodemic amid this pandemic. Are there steps Google's taking now that it wasn't taking a year or two ago? It feels to me like these big technology platforms are they're doing more than they used to try to combat health disinformation.
Well, we've been fighting disinformation since the day Google was founded. But there are always new steps. We're always looking to do more. I think what's important to keep in mind is that Google, is a free service. Google Search is a free service. We have billions of users around the globe who use us every day because they trust us. And so it's important that we earn that trust. So COVID, for instance, has raised that bar. COVID caused a steep rise in the number of Google searches we see on that subject, not just for things like breaking news, but important questions about my community. What's going on with the schools? Where can I get tested? So on and so forth. So there too, we stepped up. We invoked our intelligence desk to monitor our results to make sure that we weren't seeing disinformation or misinformation appear in those results. We worked very closely with the CDC, the World Health Organization, to make sure that we were surfacing accurate statistical information about the crisis. And importantly, we get a view of the kinds of questions that people are looking for answers to. So we use that as an opportunity to work more closely with local news organizations and say, these are the questions that people are asking. Do you have those answers available on your site? So that you can not only provide those answers, but build the perception of the value of what you bring your community so that you can continue to garner the support of your community for your ongoing efforts.
Right, such a great point. The data tells us what the audience needs, not in terms of traffic or clicks, but in terms of questions. And it's amazing to think about all the places where Google is in our lives now. Like I was just thinking, Richard, that when I take my daughter to preschool every day, I now have to fill out one of those forms to confirm that she's healthy. And it's a Google form. Google powers that form. There's all these ways people don't even realize the technology is helping them. So finally, on World News Day, what's your message for the journalists watching this? What's your message for World News Day?
First of all, to thank them for what they're doing, right? Journalists do tremendously difficult jobs, don't get paid huge amounts of money, yet it's of vital importance to our democracy. That's the first message, our thanks. Second is to continue to develop your craft and develop how you provide solutions in our complex world. Right? It is a complex world. It is more divisive than it has been in the past. What does that tell us about how journalism should evolve? What does that tell us as to how we as journalists build trust in our audiences, right? In a world where people are so suspicious and often suspicious of the press itself. And so I think that as well requires all of us to step back and reconsider, what does it mean to provide quality journalism? How do we do that in ways that are effective to a society that is, looking at the news on their cell phones throughout the day? How do we do it in a way that gains and holds their sense of trust and credibility with the important work that we do? And obviously, Google is not a journalistic organization. I'm no longer a working journalist. But we see our role to do our best to help in finding answers to those questions. We don't know the answers. We're very good at technology. We're very good at bringing tools to bear. And I think we're very good at collaborating to try to help find better paths going forward. I think that's hugely important. And World News Day, to me, is so valuable in that it celebrates the importance of journalism and celebrates the kind of successes that journalism can have. Massively important.
Richard, thanks so much.
Thank you.
In a perfect world, maybe you wouldn't know the name of my next guest, and we wouldn't hang on his every word in the year 2020. Of course, in this year of all years, we realize the world is not perfect. In this year, unlike any other, our next guest has been the face of the science behind the COVID-19 crisis and the world's search for vaccines. In a year when we all have questions, he is a resource who continues to give us answers, even if they're not always the answers we want to hear. In a time of panic and fear, he has been a voice of reason, a person of science who favors truth over spin. He has been an advisor to every U.S. president since Ronald Reagan and remains one of the world's most recognized experts on infectious diseases. And yes, Brad Pitt played him on Saturday Night Live. Not many of us have had that honor. He is the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease. I recently spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci, thanks for joining me. Happy World News Day.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
What's your approach to the news media throughout this pandemic? How would you describe your approach?
Well, I have a very good relationship with the news media because, as a public health official and a physician scientist, as director of the organization that's involved in developing the vaccines and the drugs for COVID-19, given this particular really public health crisis that we're in, it's very important to get accurate information out to the public based on scientific data and solid evidence. And working closely with the media is an extraordinarily critical way of getting that information out. So my relationship with the media and my interactions with the media, I think, are critical to my job, my function of getting the proper and appropriate and correct information out.
My impression is that you've had an all of the above strategy, where you were on Good Morning America earlier today, and now you're here with me. You've been on webcasts, podcasts, everything. Is that right? It's an all of the above strategy?
Well, yes, it is. And I think you really got to try and be out there in a consistent message as often as you possibly can, because there is so much, misinformation during this very divisive time that we're in. And the public really needs to know the facts in going through this extraordinary experience that we're all going through.
Yeah. Do you think, are there specifics you feel you've learned about the media this year? And you've been in this, of course, for decades, but is it different this year, the things you've learned?
Well, yeah, I have been interacting intensively with the media now for at least 36 or more years since I've been the director of the Institute. The one thing that's different right now is some of the media that I deal with really kind of, I wouldn't say distort things, but certainly give opposing perspectives on what seems to be a pretty obvious fact or a body of data. So I try not to get too perturbed by that, but it's you know what I'm talking about when you listen to some networks.
What's the most pernicious example of that?
Well, I mean, I think if you listen to Fox News, with all due respect to the fact that they do have some good reporters, some of the things that they report there are outlandish, to be honest with you.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about, especially in the primetime shows, about masks not being effective. What do you want people to know about masks?
Well, if you look at the scientific data, the masks are clearly work. I mean, they are part of a multifaceted approach of masks, keeping distance, avoiding crowds, washing hands, doing things outdoors much more than indoors. All of that is a combination of prevention modalities that are easy to do, relatively speaking. And you can accomplish some of the things that you want to about opening up the economy, and you can actually do that in a prudent and careful way.
Right, it makes it possible for me to go into Starbucks and go ahead and spend a few dollars if I'm wearing a mask. But here's the game that these hyperpartisan websites play. They'll say, hey, Dr. Fauci, you advised against masks last winter, so you're a hypocrite and we shouldn't listen to you. What do you think that's about? Is it about taking snippets of sentences and just trying to smear you like that? What's that about?
You know, I don't know what it's about, but it's very disconcerting, Brian, because it's very clear what I think whoever does these things does not appreciate is that science accumulates evidence and data. And at any given moment, when you're having an evolving situation like COVID-19, which clearly is evolving in a very rapid way, you make a recommendation or you make a policy based on the information that you have at a particular time, such as early on in the outbreak in February and March. As you get further information, you have to be humble enough and flexible enough to make your statements and your policy and your recommendation based on the evidence that you now have, which may actually change some of the policy. And the typical example that I think you just were alluding to was the issue with masks, that at a time when it was clear that when people were running to get masks, that wasn't enough masks for the people who were taking care of sick individuals, namely healthcare providers. So we were not recommending that people wear masks. And then something else happened. We learned that about 40 to 50% of the individuals who are infected are without symptoms. And then we learned that a substantial proportion of the transmissions occur from an asymptomatic person to an uninfected person. So when you put those two things together, when there was no longer a shortage of masks, it was clear that cloth coverings in many respects were just as good as surgical masks. And when it became clear that anyone could be infected, even someone without symptoms, so the idea of staying away from someone who has symptoms no longer held true. Anyone could be infected, even yourself, without knowing it. So we went from not recommending masks to very, very strongly recommending masks. And that was based on evolving scientific knowledge. But some of the media who like to make hay of that keep saying, oh, you keep changing your mind all the time, or you were incorrect. Well, no, we were correct at the time that that statement was made. But when the scientific data made it clear that we had to change that recommendation, we did. But
those clickbait
that's not the way it gets reported.
Right, those hit jobs, that's a literacy problem, really. But setting aside those hyper-partisan media outlets, I think you're making an important point about science and journalism. Science evolves, journalism has to evolve as well. We have to keep up with what you all are learning every day.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking about the media, I mean, as I have seen, you know, there are reporters who really, you know, do a great job. And even Fox, even on the Fox channels, there are some that are really, really good that I totally respect. But there are others that just, you know, anything that I would say, they'll distort a bit. And I'm not sure there's anything I can do about that.
For someone tasked with managing the public's health, do you think social media is mostly beneficial or mostly detrimental this year amid the pandemic?
You know, it's a mixed bag. Brian, I don't know if I'm qualified to make a judgment on that because I'm so busy. You know, I don't tweet. I don't have a Twitter account. I don't do social media, but obviously I'm aware of it and I see it. You know, at its best, it can disseminate important information widely, but at its worst, it can disseminate absolutely incorrect information widely. So it's sort of a balance there. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, it's very hard to know. In a health crisis, broadly speaking, how have you tried to separate science from politics? That's our big picture question for World News Day.
Well, what I do is I stay out of politics. I mean, I have to get involved in policy that's based on the science of which I am responsible for and that I may be a subject matter expert on. But people need to understand my entire career of dealing with the public with regard to interacting with the media and the press and representing the scientific community, I have completely stayed out of any political ideology. In fact, people who've known me for the 35, 40 years still have no idea what my political ideology is because I never, ever express it or let it get involved in anything I do, which is the reason why I've been able to successfully get along with 6 presidents that I've had the privilege of advising over the last 35, 40 years.
Our next performer is a 21st century icon. She is a singer, songwriter, actress, and producer who has sold more than 25 million albums. She is a Brit Award winner, an MTV Award winner, and a Grammy Award winner. As a citizen of the world, she is using her platform to help those in need. This year, she founded a charity called My Good. The purpose is to advocate for the families of victims of police killings. My Good is not an anti-police organization. It is a place that seeks to help affected families with their emotional, mental, physical, and financial wellness. My Good was also founded to add its voice to the movement to prevent future tragedies of this kind. Now, please welcome to World News Day, Macy Gray.
Games, changes, and fears. When will they go from here? When will they stop? I believe fate has brought us here. We should be together, baby, but we're not. And I play it off, but I'm dreaming of you. And I keep my cool, but I'm feeling. I try to say goodbye and I choke. I walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear. My world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye and I'm choking. I walk away. I try to hide it, but it's clear. My world crumbles when you are not near. I made up here to be free, but I'm just a prisoner of your love. And I may seem alright and smile when you leave, but my smiles are just a front, just a front. Hey, and I play it off, but I'm dreaming of you. And I keep my cool, but I'm feeling. I try to say goodbye and I choke. I walk away. I try to hide it, but it's clear. I crumble when you are not near. Goodbye and I'm choking. I walk away and I stumble. I try to hide it, but it's clear. I crumble when you are not near. Here is my confession. May I be your possession. Boy, I need your touch. Your love kisses and such. With all my might, I try. This I can't deny. And I play it off, but I'm dreaming of you. And I keep my cool. show, but I'm feeling. I try to say goodbye and I choke. I walk away and I stumble. I try to hide it, but it's clear. I crumble when you are not there. Goodbye and I'm choking. I walk away and I stumble. I try to hide it, but it's clear. I crumble when you are not near. You see, everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. No more tears in the house tonight because everything's gonna be alright. There'll be no crying. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So there'll be no crying. No, no. Goodbye and I choke. I walk away and I stumble. I try to hide it, but it's clear. I crumble when you are not near. Goodbye and I choke. I walk away and I stumble. Oh, I try to hide it, it's clear. I will crumble when you are not near. Thank you, everybody at World News Day. God bless you. Stay awesome. See you next time.
Courage can take many forms. After a storied career investigating terrorism in Southeast Asia and tenures as bureau chief for CNN's Manila and Jakarta bureaus, Maria Ressa co-founded Rappler, which quickly emerged as the top digital-only website that continues to lead the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. Over her last 35 years of work, Ressa has suffered constant harassment, repeated attempts to discredit her, multiple arrests, and she's even had to post bail 8 times just to remain free. All of this has been the toll she has paid on her search for the truth. While others may have recoiled, Ressa's resolve has remained. For her work on disinformation and fake news, she was named one of Time magazine's People of the Year in 2018. And she was named one of the 100 most influential people in 2019. She was also part of the BBC's 100 most inspiring and influential people of 2019. And the worldwide recognition of her work continues. Meanwhile, in her home country, the battle with her government for free expression wages on. In June of this year, in a case that most observers have said is political, she was convicted of cyber libel. So courage can take many forms. If courage has a face, it looks a lot like Maria Ressa. Now, joining Maria is a Bay Area journalist whose work on race relations, education reform, and migrant separation has led to her being a recipient of a 2017 Edward R. Murrow Award. Please welcome from ABC News, Chris Reyes, and from Rappler, Maria Ressa.
Hi, Maria. I'm so honored to be doing this interview. I can't even tell you.
It is so good to see you again.
Good to see you. Considering that we are celebrating World News Day, we're amongst friends. I want my first question to be, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good, strangely enough, right? I mean, there are good times, there are bad times. Depends on which minute you ask me. But I think what I've learned a lot is anger management and how to turn lemons into lemonade. That's the other lesson.
You know, I want to bring up our personal connection because we met in Manila so many years ago, just as you were beginning to launch Rappler. And I remember how excited you were at the time of the concept of online news and this idea that we could exchange information in real time, that we could get a sense of how people were feeling about issues. How has your perspective changed? And do you have warnings for that, Maria, circa 2012?
No, if I had it if I had to do it all over again, I would do exactly what I've done. I mean, except for me, remember how I tried to convince you to stay in the Philippines? I'm glad you didn't listen to me. But, you know,
I've been watching very closely.
Well, look, back then we were very excited about technology, how technology was the enabler. So, and that's when we started Rappler, the growth of Rappler was hinged on how we made investigative journalism combined with technology and community. We built communities of action. That was the goal of Rappler. So you can say that I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed in the power of social media, the power of social networks on steroids. We didn't see the danger signals until 2015, 2016. And in 2016, that was really when the dominoes began to fall. The first domino was the Philippines, the election of Duterte in May. A month later was Brexit. And then it just kept going, right? All the way through the election of Trump, blah, 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 all the way. And I think, you know, we've just realized that social media, which we thought was going to be this enabler, has become it's the main tool in the toolbox of digital dictators. And it has enabled the rise of digital authoritarians all around the world. And it has become today a behavioral modification system that essentially takes everything that we put into it, translates it to data, machine learning into artificial intelligence, and then knows you better than you know yourself, takes your most vulnerable moment and sells it to anyone who will pay, whether that's a company or a country. And with this kind of ecosystem, it turned everything upside down, because with the choices the tech platforms have made, lies laced with anger and hate spread faster than facts. And if you don't have facts, I think, you know, we saw all the dangers 2016, 2017, 2018. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without facts, you cannot have democracy. And that's dawning on everybody today. But, you know, what I've lived through in the last 4 years is really seeing how alternate realities come to be, how lies, first with social media, then with weaponizing the law, how that can make a journalist a criminal. That's really, you know, that was seeded in 2016, in 2017. So these exponential bottom-up attacks. And then President Duterte comes top down in 2017. A week later, I get the first subpoena. 2018 was the weaponization of the law. 11 cases filed against me and Rappler. 2019, arrest warrants, 8 of them, arrested and then detained. And then 2020, June 15th, I and a colleague, a former colleague, were convicted. Journalist equals criminal in 2016, journalist equals criminal in 2020, which is real. I know my reality. I'm not a criminal, but that's how dangerous it's become. And that's what social media has helped create.
I think I speak for journalists around the world when I say that we stand with you. You've had such a front row seat to all of this, and you explain it so eloquently. Do you think that the average reader, or, you know, citizens trying to kind of inform themselves about this complicated world, do you think they understand it the way you understand it?
I think normal people will kind of realize that the world is toxic. They want to shut down from social media. It's almost like you've been told that the inner demon in you can come out. You can unleash it. And that toxicity, everybody realizes. Women are attacked far more than men, right? And anyone who, I guess the kinds of exponential, the propaganda warfare, people see that also. I think the other part that people don't see is how the social media platforms have built divisiveness into their design. And that's this whole us against them thinking, right? And that's extremely dangerous because it's literally pulling our societies apart. And that's the reason why facts have become so debatable.
And I know we're running into time now here, but the theme is press freedom. This is something that we value as journalists. how do we get everybody to value this? What's the battle cry?
I mean, Chris, when you don't have facts, when you are battling for facts, journalists are at the front line. You know, journalism becomes an advocacy in a battle for truth. And so now more than at any other time, by next year, I'll have been a journalist for 35 years. I'm old. I've never been under attack as much as I am today, just for doing my job. It is worse than a war zone. It's worse than any conflict zone. And I guess that brings it home. That is the conflict zone. That is the war zone. The war is for facts. So please stand up, go to the facts. Try not to get manipulated emotionally. If you feel yourself getting angry by something, chances are there's manipulation that goes there. Stop and think. Stop thinking fast and think slow.
Oh, that's a battle cry if I've ever heard one. Maria, thank you for your courage. Thank you for holding the line, as you repeatedly say, and we stand with you.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Today, we have had a glimpse at some of the biggest stories of this extraordinary year, shared with us by some of those who have been closest to the story. In doing so, we've had a chance to acknowledge, celebrate, and thank those on the front lines of journalism, those who help us navigate the maze of disinformation, fake news, emotion, and partisan agendas. You know, that maze sometimes serves as a barrier to the truth journalists find and the truth they report. But journalism is winning and figuring out how to get through the maze. I think we've been reminded today, in no uncertain terms, that, as Maria Ressa tells us, we are in a war, and the war is for facts. So to those of you who fight in the trenches of journalism every day, thank you. To those subjects of the story who possess the courage to share your truth, thank you. To those of you who risk your lives to find the truth, thank you. And to those of you who seek out and support credible news sources, thank you. So much work has been done. So much more is still left to do. I think we're reminded of that each day with each passing hour. There's so much more to do, so many stories still to tell. So to those of you watching who are students of journalism, who are entering this profession, we hope that some of what you heard tonight leaves you inspired more than ever to continue to seek the light. We need you to walk towards it. The world needs you to walk towards it and help us all understand the truth. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Stelter. Be kind, be calm, be safe, and happy World News Day.